Hey everyone, welcome back to the deep dive. We've got a really interesting topic to dig into today. You, our listener, actually sent this one in, and it's something that I think a lot of folks will connect with.
Yeah, looking forward to this one.
It's all about using art to, well, help people who are struggling with eating disorders.
Really powerful stuff, actually. I've seen firsthand how art can be like a whole other language when it comes to healing, especially with something as complex as an eating disorder.
Totally. And you shared a whole bunch of research and stories about how art therapy is being used to help people better understand and hopefully heal from anorexia, bulimia, and even, those eating disorders that don't fit neatly into those categories, what they call ED and S.
Right, right. And the stuff you sent over, it really gets into some pretty surprising ways that art can actually unlock emotional expression, help people discover things about themselves, and ultimately support their recovery.
Okay, so let's break this down a bit. First off, what exactly are we talking about when we say eating disorders? Yeah, good point. I mean, the materials you sent, they refer to the DSM-IVTR, which is basically like the go-to guide in mental health for categorizing these things. And it basically describes eating disorders as, kind of a cluster of difficult thoughts and behaviors
Yeah.
that center around food, weight, and body image.
Right. And within that, the sources highlight the three main types, right? Anorexia nervosa, bulimia nervosa, and ED-NOS.
Exactly. So with anorexia, it's, a real struggle to maintain a healthy weight. There's often a distorted perception of their body and like a really intense fear of gaining weight.
Okay.
Then there's bulimia,
Yeah.
which involves these repeated episodes of binge eating, followed by behaviors to prevent weight gain.
Mm.
Things like purging. And just like with anorexia, there are also those, really significant worries about body shape and weight.
And then ED-NOS, I guess that's sort of the catch-all term, for when someone's really struggling with their relationship with food, but they don't necessarily meet the exact criteria for anorexia or bulimia.
Precisely.
Yeah.
And that can include things like, binge eating disorder, but without the purging behaviors.
Got it. Now, one thing that really struck me as I was going through the material was this idea that sometimes even positive qualities can actually contribute to the development of these disorders.
Oh, yeah, definitely. Things like being caring, sensitive, intelligent, traits we generally consider strengths. But the research suggests that these strengths can sometimes make individuals more vulnerable. Maybe they're more in tune with family dynamics or more sensitive to unmet emotional needs, maybe even taking on other people's emotional baggage.
Yeah, that makes sense. And then the sources connect this to the idea that if someone's grown up in a difficult family environment
Right.
or has experienced abuse, whether it's psychological, physical, or sexual, this can lead to, well, like you said, unmet emotional needs. And for some, their relationship with food becomes a way to cope.
Absolutely. And then this is where it's really fascinating. The material suggests that in some cases, art can actually offer an alternative to that reliance on food. At first, it might be a way to kind of purge troublesome thoughts and feelings, sort of like a parallel, although obviously different, to the physical act of purging in bulimia.
Okay, so they're expressing themselves through art instead of using food.
Right. But here's where it gets really interesting. One study by Levins back in 1995 showed how this evolves. Art can actually go beyond just releasing those difficult emotions and become a way for individuals to actually develop and communicate ideas.
So they're using a new language, in a sense.
Exactly. And there's this really great observation from Hinz, who noticed that patients often seem to respond better to therapy when they're working with their own images. It's as if the answers they need are coming from within the art itself, rather than being imposed from outside.
So it's less about being told what to do and more about discovering their own path.
Right.
Now, another key point that comes up repeatedly in the materials is this idea of disconnection from emotions. Individuals with eating disorders often use food, or the restriction of food, to try to numb or avoid their feelings.
Absolutely. It's like they've become so good at detaching from their emotions. Food, or those restrictive behaviors, become a kind of shield.
Yeah. And art therapy, it seems, offers a way to kind of gently guide them back, to reconnect with those feelings. The sources even mention concepts like reluctant rage and the idea of imagine not holding back as ways that art can help bring these emotions to the surface.
And what's interesting is some people with eating disorders, they have a hard time identifying emotions, not just in themselves, but in others too. There's research by Hayaki and others that has shown this difficulty with emotional recognition.
So how do they use art to address this?
Well, one example is the 4 basic emotions exercise, where they use color, form, line, and pattern to visually represent anger, sadness, fear, and happiness. The key here is that they're not treating emotions as negative things, but as signals, messages that their body is trying to communicate.
So it's about learning to understand their internal communication system.
Exactly.
I like it.
Another exercise they talk about is the body feelings map,
Okay.
where they connect emotions to physical sensations in their body. This can help them recognize their personal triggers, like stress, boredom, loneliness, things that might lead to those eating disorder behaviors. There's some great research on this by Fairburn and van der Linden and their colleagues.
Interesting. So they're making those mind-body connections.
Exactly. And then there's this really neat exercise called pride, shame, joy circles. It's a visual way to demonstrate how the amount of time we spend feeling certain emotions can really affect our overall mood, emphasizing that it's important to make time for positive experiences.
So we're not just talking about the presence of emotions, but how much space they occupy in our lives.
Right. And how we have a choice in that.
Okay, let's shift gears a bit now and talk about body image, which, as we know, is often a central issue in eating disorders. The material emphasizes this gap that exists between how someone sees their own body and what they think their ideal body should look like.
Absolutely. And that dissatisfaction, it can be so powerful and so damaging. The sources point to a number of things that can contribute to this, like a mother's own negative body image, direct negative comments about a person's appearance, and, of course, the media's constant portrayal of these often unrealistic and unattainable ideals of thinness.
And we can't forget the impact of things like teasing or, sadly, abuse, which are also linked to those feelings of body dissatisfaction.
Absolutely. So given all these negative influences, it's really inspiring to see how art therapy offers some concrete ways to kind of push back against these beliefs.
Yeah, how so?
Well, one example is the talk back to the mirror exercise, where individuals use collage to frame a mirror with positive affirmations. So it's about intentionally shifting their focus from just appearance to what their body can do. It's about rewriting the story they tell themselves.
I love that. It's a really active way to change the conversation.
Right. And then there's this interesting exercise where they do drawings based on the phrases fat is and thin is. It's a way for them to explore their feelings about personal boundaries and even sexuality. There's this really telling example in the material about a woman who said, regardless of her size, she felt most comfortable in her kitchen with her cat.
It shows how these exercises can really tap into deeper feelings, feelings that aren't just about physical appearance.
Absolutely. And then there's the mirror self-portrait exercise,
Okay.
where they draw themselves as they see themselves in the mirror. This can actually reveal distortions in body image that the person isn't even consciously aware of.
So they're seeing themselves from a different perspective.
Exactly. And that can be a starting point for some really valuable discussions in therapy.
And the materials point out that sometimes these self-portraits can be a way for the body to speak, especially if someone's struggling to be assertive verbally.
Exactly. It's like the art gives voice to something that words can't quite capture.
I like that.
And then finally, in terms of body image, there's the animal self sculpture or drawing. It encourages patients to connect with their instinctual strengths and preferences. It's all about helping them develop a sense of self that's separate from those past negative influences and those societal pressures.
So tapping into something deeper, something more authentic.
Precisely.
Now, moving on to self-acceptance, the sources highlight how individuals with eating disorders often have these very negative perceptions of themselves.
Yeah. And art therapy really dives into how we can, challenge and shift those views.
Okay.
One technique that jumped out at me was the scribble drawing. It's this amazing way to access kind of hidden messages from within. Maybe even revealing qualities that the individual needs to embrace for their recovery. There's this really moving example of a dove appearing in a scribble, representing peace and self-acceptance.
Wow. So powerful how those images can just emerge.
Right. And what's great about the scribble is that it's so open-ended, it lets the unconscious speak, without all that judgment from the inner critic. And then there's the masculinity-femininity collage. It encourages patients to recognize and integrate traits that are traditionally associated with the opposite gender.
Interesting. And the material even mentions a study by Hepp and colleagues back in 2005 that found a correlation between embracing a more androgynous identity and fewer eating disorder symptoms.
Yeah. It makes you think about how important it is to have more flexible, less rigid sense of self.
Totally.
And then there's the harmony drawing, where patients are encouraged to try and visually integrate opposing forces within themselves. Like one example they use is a mountain for masculine traits and a heart for feminine traits.
Yeah.
It's all about recognizing the need for balance.
Yeah, I like that.
And then there's the self-symbol sculpture. This one's done in clay, and it seems to really address those feelings of, ineffectiveness that are so common. There's this really insightful observation in the material that for some people, their eating disorder may have been the first area in their lives where they actually felt competent.
So it's about finding a healthier way to experience that sense of control and mastery.
Exactly. And making something tangible, something real.
Right.
Then there's this really powerful technique using masks. One mask represents the qualities they dislike about themselves, and then they make a companion mask to represent qualities they admire in others.
Okay.
It's a way to explore both the things they project outward and the things they deny within themselves. It's all about bringing those shadow parts into the light so they can be acknowledged and integrated.
That's a great way to put it.
Now, the material also touches upon something that I think is often overlooked, the spiritual dimension of eating disorders. Many individuals also experience a kind of spiritual emptiness or a void. And art therapy offers some really unique ways to explore this aspect.
Okay.
One exercise that stood out was the bridge to the divine construction. It uses clay to symbolize a connection to a higher power, or whatever that means to the individual. And what's cool is that the emphasis is on building a bridge, on integration, rather than trying to eliminate what they perceive as negative about themselves.
So it's about acceptance, not rejection.
Precisely. And then there is two really interesting exercises called the gift of inner blessings and a greater gift. They both involve working with random magazine pages and torn shapes, and they're presented as ways to uncover these unexpected messages of healing and to reflect on the often surprising gifts that can come from the recovery process. It's about finding meaning and hope in unexpected places.
I like that.
Yeah, it's quite beautiful. And then there's the integration mandala. It aims to connect those inner and outer blessings, and to foster a sense of purpose that goes beyond just achieving a certain body shape.
So it's about finding a bigger picture, a greater meaning.
Exactly. And then there's the labyrinth drawing, which is presented as a visual metaphor for the spiritual journey, with its inherent stages of letting go, receiving new insights, and returning with a transformed sense of self.
It's a really evocative image, isn't it? That journey through the labyrinth.
It really is.
Yeah.
And lastly, they talk about the practice of writing daily affirmations in a journal. It's about developing those personalized, positive statements that celebrate both recovery and a connection to one's inner wisdom.
So those affirmations become like a daily reminder of their strength and progress.
Absolutely.
We've covered so many different ways that art can be used in therapy, but something that really stood out to me in the materials is this emphasis on the fact that it's not about creating perfect works of art.
Oh, yeah, that's crucial. It's not about being a great artist. It's about the meaning and the insights that the art reveals.
Yeah, exactly. One quote that really stuck with me was, "Art did not have to adorn, it merely had to inform."
That's a perfect way to put it. And the review of the artwork, throughout therapy is also really important. It allows patients to look for patterns, to really track their healing process visually. The material mentions some common themes that might emerge, like maybe an avoidance of self-care, a tendency to deny their feelings and needs, and importantly, the emergence of those messages of healing and growth.
Those insights can be so valuable, can't they?
Absolutely. And, the material also stresses how important it is for people to keep expressing themselves creatively, even after therapy ends.
Yeah.
Things like journaling and maybe even looking for groups or online communities where they can share their journey. The sources mention some great resources like ANR Red, something-fishy.org, ANAD, and menstuff.org. It's about giving people tools they can use long-term to support their recovery. And finally, the materials touch on how important it is to be mindful of cultural considerations in art therapy. Recognizing that art can be this amazing form of indirect communication,
Right.
which can be especially valuable in cultures where talking directly about your emotions might not be encouraged.
That's a great point.
It shows how flexible and sensitive art therapy can be.
Okay, so as we wrap up this deep dive, it's clear that art can offer a really powerful and unique path to both understanding and healing from eating disorders.
Absolutely.
It gives a voice to emotions that might otherwise be silenced. It offers a way to challenge those really deep-seated negative self-perceptions. It fosters self-acceptance. And it can even help individuals connect with their own inner wisdom and spirituality. It's pretty remarkable.
It really is. The material you shared really highlights the profound impact art therapy can have. It
Hmm.
offers these practical tools and really insightful exercises for anyone on that, often complex journey of recovery. It's like a whole other language when words just aren't enough.
So true. And that leads us to our final thought for you to consider. If art can be so effective in addressing eating disorders, bypassing those verbal barriers and tapping into our inner world, what other psychological challenges might find new and effective avenues for healing through creative expression? Something to ponder, for sure. Thanks again for bringing these incredibly insightful sources to our attention. It's been a really fascinating deep dive.
My pleasure. Always love exploring these topics.